there may be more people coming on. This is the first Service Providers Conference webinar that we've run. We have run other sessions for the sector, for sector CEOs, but this one is to the sector as a whole. It'll be one of 4 that's coming, and on today's agenda is Minister Foley, Melissa Arduca from the department, and Yvonne Bonomo from St Vincent's Hospital. At this point, I'll hand it over to Rebecca, and she'll do an acknowledgement of country, and then we'll move on to the speakers. As many of you may know, Parliament is recommenced today. Minister Foley is caught up in proceedings there. There is an expectation that he'll walk out of Parliament and come and speak to us, but it all depends on what's happening in the House at the time. But we're hopeful that he'll be able to continue with his participation in this event. So I'll just hand it over to Rebecca at this point.
Thanks, Sam. Morning, everybody. This is pretty exciting, but pretty daunting. I know there's a fair few of you out there that I won't be able to see your faces, and trust me, you're not going to see mine all day because I'm going to blank my screen out. I would like to thank VAADA for organising this. It's wonderful to be able to use technology to keep connected and still find out what's happening in the sector. I know that each and every alcohol and other drug agency has been working so hard to ensure that our clients are seen and still getting a high quality, professional and safe service. So I actually wanted to start with a thank you to all you guys who work in the sector. Your work doesn't go unnoticed, and being a proud AOD background girl myself, I know that our clients are in great hands. So in keeping with the spirit of reconciliation, I wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians in the land on where we all meet. It's a bit different because we're all meeting at different parts of the state. I wish to pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge any Aboriginal people who we have online today. I wish to acknowledge the important role the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people continue to play in our community, and that this is and always will be traditional Aboriginal land. So thanks for that. We are waiting for Minister Foley to jump on. Like Sam said, if you've got a question, please put it in Q&A. We won't be answering them from the chat function, but it is nice to a shout out to those who have said good morning to us. So we might just...
Sorry, Rebecca, it's just Melissa Arduca here from the department. I just wanted to double check, is the Minister, or maybe Caitlin, is the Minister online yet? I'm just, you know, I'm doing that, I'm texting his office as we speak, so.
We were hoping he was going to be first up.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. No, the Minister is not online. So I think, Melissa, what we might do is start with you, if that's okay with everyone. And when he comes on, maybe we'll just jump straight into him just to keep things rolling. I think that's probably the best way to handle this.
Thanks, Caitlin. So Melissa from the Department of Health and Human Services is going to give us an update. So thank you, Melissa.
Hi everyone. Sorry, I'm just quickly, I can see a message about to come through. But what I might just start kind of talking, and presumably at some point you'll throw me off and the Minister will come on. Sorry, can everyone go just to double check, can people hear me?
Yes, we can, fine.
Okay, I am being told he is just about there, but look, why don't I just kind of get started, and as I said, I will stop, once the Minister arrives. And, I just kind of echo, thanks everyone for joining us here today. So I'm Melissa, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Melissa Adolescent, and I'm the Assistant Director of Alcohol and Other Drugs Policy at the Department of Health and Human Services. And I'm also leading the work here at the department on the COVID-19 response for the alcohol and other drugs sector. Similarly, I want to also start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, wherever the land is that you're joining us on today, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also like to welcome any Aboriginal elders or Aboriginal people who have joined us here today. And I can see the Minister connecting as we speak, so I might just put a pause there. He's connecting. Caitlin. the joys of online forums.
Yes.
Yes.
So it looks like his audio, I can't hello. We just need some picture, hopefully. Fabulous.
There he is.
I'll go now.
I'll jump off.
Good morning, Minister Foley. I'm Rebecca. I'm the President of VAADA. We have been waiting for you, and we will hand over to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I know it's Parliament sitting day and you must be crazy busy. So over to you.
Hear me okay? Well,
Yes, we can, Minister. Did you want to turn your camera on?
is it on or off?
It's off.
It's off. All right. Forgive me whilst I negotiate with the technology. Zoom, camera. Oh, it says it's on. How are you now?
It is. Wonderful. Thank you. I will hand over to you.
Thank you very much. So where to begin in such remarkably challenging and unusual times? Can I begin by thanking VAADA for giving us the opportunity to meet and discuss in the challenging, almost existential issues for us all in this time. And can I particularly begin by acknowledging that we do meet on lots of places, I'm gathering, on the traditional lands of the First Peoples of this nation. I want to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I want to particularly acknowledge, in doing that, both the disproportionate impact that the issues of the COVID-19 disease and virus, coronavirus, is having not just on our Indigenous brothers and sisters, but those who deal with the challenges and those who lead the community response to the challenges of those dealing with alcohol and other drug addictions and other matters. Can I acknowledge the work that VAADA does? Can I thank Sam? Can I thank Yvonne? And can I thank everyone who's been a part of putting on this important forum? I understand you've got limited time, and indeed I've got limited time as well in this unusual day. But I was very keen to slot it in on this unscheduled Parliament sitting day, because the impact that we know COVID-19 and the tipping upside down of so much of what we have understood to be contemporary and existing practice in alcohol and other drugs responses is so critical to not just responding and dealing with the crisis, not just getting through the crisis in the interests of those community members who, but for the work that you all do, would face an even heightened level of risk and threat to their well-being, if not their lives. We've got those set of challenges, but at the same time, we do so in a world in which the response to those challenges, the social distancing, the application of reprioritisation in the health system and in the community support system, has seen the networks that those fellow citizens, fellow community members look to for the support from VAADA and its members being at risk from evaporating, and the services and the application of what we do and what you do to engage with them in a pathway to recovery and support are also at risk. So the support that we need to bring in terms of changing how we work, how we go about engaging in that work, is probably more vital and more critical than it has ever been in certainly VAADA's long and proud history, and frankly, like nothing else that any of us have seen in our professional lives. So we're at risk, if we don't manage this appropriately, of losing connection with so many people who look to the services and the supports and the agency that you provide those people from engaging with services. And at the same time, as I don't have to tell you, I'm sure, the nature of particularly the illicit drug market with all of its normal channels of supply and production and distribution have also been severely disrupted, which is resulting in changes of patterns that we're still trying to get out. Well, I'm still trying to get my brain around, and I'd welcome any advice and assistance, as would my department and agencies, around what are the implications of that. Those are the kind of really challenging, significant threats to the lives, well-being of the people who rely on the work that VAADA and its members do. At the same time, in this crisis, and we're unsure as to how long it will go for, we also know that we are seeing an attendant economic crisis of significant proportions, equally going to have an impact on the well-being, the capacity of our community to be the best it can. And if crises of history tell us, of recent history tell us, of comparative countries around the world, our own history tell us, crises of the kind of scale that we're about to, by all predictions, see in the economic world will further add to the pressures that VAADA, its members and its clients will have to deal with. They're the pretty grim side of things. Yet what we're also seeing is a redefinition, I think rightly, of what is the role of government, what is the role of partnerships, what is the role of community in responding to what's really the one crisis, but with multiple expressions of that. And in that regard, whether it's differences that are forced on us through social distancing, to how we operate and work and the measures that that will bring, that's one set of challenges. But the other set of challenges is there is now a focus like never before in the community's mind about not only what is the role of governments, not only what is the role of an interventionist, activist government that's going to have to invest in a whole range of services, models of delivery and applications in ways that perhaps only a few months ago we weren't contemplating in a way that we are now. That's one set of issues. But the other set of issues is how do we then engage with the likes of VAADA and its members in grabbing those parts of practice change, focus of what government needs to do, partnerships with particularly non-government organisations, review the legislative landscape, review the delivery of services landscape in a way perhaps that this is going to force us that we never have before. Add to that the fact that the still to be landed reconsideration of what the Royal Commission of Victoria's mental health system does, noting that it does have in its forward plan and its terms of reference a significant point of reference about the relationship between alcohol and other drugs, harm minimisation, and the mental health system as part of its work. And the landscape is being disrupted in ways that, frankly, none of us could have predicted, and I would be surprised if any of us have seen or are likely to see in our professional and community lives. So this is actually an ideal time for VAADA, its leadership, its members, and the voice of its consumers and clients and people it deals with to ponder, to reimagine, and to advocate for the kind of changes that VAADA has long been a leader in what will no doubt be a very crowded, contested public policy space, but one in which offers the likes of VAADA, the likes of the many organisations that make up its activist membership and the people whose lives depend on you, offers government, offers the community an unprecedented opportunity to deliver change that will endure and see the kind of issues that we've been challenging with in this sector, given the needs and the support that perhaps hitherto had not been the priority of the community and governments. I should take this opportunity also of thanking VAADA for its outstanding advocacy over the work of the medically supervised injecting facility in the context of a wider harm minimisation agenda. That centre, as you know, is well down the track of a 2-year trial, which ends on the 30th of June. So government is just awaiting the report from the independent expert committee that has consulted widely around what that work will do. And whilst it will, of course, focus on what I would say is the outstanding success and advocacy of the work of what goes on in the medically supervised injecting facility, we also asked them to ponder, if you recall, as part of the legislation in terms of reference some time ago, to put that in the context of the wider debate around where harm minimisation and alcohol and drug services are going. Now, because of data and all sorts of other things, they might have had to have constructed their report and their argument in a way that doesn't take account of all of the more recent implications of the coronavirus and its implications. But I'm sure when we receive it and when we respond to it, as we must before the 30th of June, that will provide yet another prospect for VAADA, its members, and the people and communities it advocates for to further prosecute this case. I know you've got a lot on your agenda, and I did indicate to the organiser, Sam, and others that I was happy to use this opportunity for a bit of Zoom two-way action. So I'm happy to do that. And again, can I thank VAADA, can I thank all its members, and can I thank you for the work you do. I wish you a successful, I don't know what this is, a Zoomathon or a webinar or whatever it is. I wish you success, and I look forward to not only responding in the best possible way to the crisis of the pandemic and its reaches into so much of our community life, but using it as an opportunity to reframe the important work that VAADA, its members, and the harm minimisation field undertakes. So I think I'm in your hands, Chair and Coordinator, as to how you want to work this. So I assume someone's running all the buttons, and I'm happy to be at your disposal. Thanks.
Thanks, Minister Foley. I just wanted to thank you for your insights and those kind words to the sector. And I think it's been evident how agencies and organisations have been able to kind of retool and think outside the box to ensure that the vulnerable clients you were talking about are getting a really amazing service. And it's wonderful to hear, because I'm hearing it, I'm the CEO of a community health service, and I'm hearing it from all levels of government, that the ability to really grasp onto the things that we've been able to do quite quickly but do have significant impact, and being up for a partnership with the department and government about how we do things better and what were the silver linings from COVID-19. So thank you for that. I'm just going to check if we've got any questions. We're still checking. Sam.
Hi, thank you kindly, Minister.
Nice background, Sam.
Yeah, I thought the Judean desert would be appropriate for these circumstances. I suppose I've got some questions. I was really heartened to hear that you welcome the advocacy, because sometimes from this perspective you sort of wonder whether you just add more oil into the fry pan. But you know, I think from our perspective there's probably a range of things that will be providing a silver lining to issues which we've never dealt with properly. And it's showing new ways in which we can work going forward. I think that there's the avenue of innovation in the pharmacotherapy area is one of them. There's still a lot more to do, but there's learnings in that space. The technology and use of it under some circumstances could provide some great benefits. The ability to get things done in a much faster way. I've never seen the cooperation work in this way across the sector. So they're all things we'll be taking forward, and obviously where I sit, you know, where our advocacy comes from the views of our sector, and so that's what we'll be taking forward to you, and we really welcome you being there and the amount of time and effort that you and the government have put in, because certainly, you know, it's been a mammoth effort from you and your colleagues. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Sam. It's strange, but there are some things that we don't actually want to lose from this crisis and coming out of this crisis. Yes, technology, yes, cooperation, yes to a continued and probably enhanced advocacy role. But you hit the nail on the head in terms of how time seems to have been compressed in this crisis, and the manner in which more has to be done in increasingly compressed periods over the last 5 or 6 weeks has been phenomenal. And I have to confess, sometimes I genuinely do not know what day it is. There are cruel people who said I never did, but they would be wrong. But I do just want to focus on the fact that there's so much in flux. Whether it be at the federal level, there are still huge gaps in the response. By the time you take into account the almost 2 million people who are in Australia but are not considered to be of Australia in terms of the response, whether it be international students, people on limited visas, asylum seekers and refugees, there are a whole gamut of people who are on the, if not on the verge, on the edge of destitution, and we're already seeing at frontline agencies the overrepresentation of some of those groups, together with if you like, more traditional groups seeking support for all sorts of issues around despair, different measures of despair. And alcohol and other drugs is one of them, but so is the shock, the related issues of homelessness, of employment, of family violence, of abuse of all sorts of things, all coming together in increasing expressions of trauma, which are seen the mounting arrangements of despair. Add to that some of the projections around what economic dislocation and employment dislocation will do, then seriously the work in which VAADA and the responses to concentrated levels of disadvantage in place in different areas is going to be significant. And I stress that the role of government is going to be called upon like never before, and government is going to have to make a big comeback in how so much of what it does and how it pays for it, and the partnerships and collaborations that we're going to need to deal with what will be, I suspect, the most challenging 12 months of our professional lives in this and other related community sectors. So all power to VAADA, Sam, and to Rebecca and to everyone. We're all going to need you to be resourced, active, and advocating for the kind of changes that we know are going to be needed. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you. We have two questions, Minister, one from Kent and one from so Kent Burgess from Star Health. Thanks, Minister, for his attention to the AOD sector and our community members at such increased risk. Can we expect the innovation implemented in pharmacotherapy, such as changes to takeaways, etc., to be made post-pandemic?
Thanks, Kent, and thank you to Star, who are very close to my heart as the member for Elmer Park. There's lots of contests in this field, and the fact that innovation around so many things, including pharmacology and other harm minimisations approaches, have a bit of wind in their sails. The job we all collectively have is to point to the benefits, point to the opportunities and lock them in, and do so in a way in partnership with others around the response that particularly deeply entrenched disadvantage works, and the role that innovation around not just pharmacological responses but other forms of support, treatment and recovery operating. So I would be keen if you and others were to add that to your advocacy list as well as your innovation list, but I think there's a degree of wind in the sails there, Kent. So thanks for that. And who was the other one, Rebecca?
Thank you, Minister. We've got one from Tim Griffiths up in sunny Shepparton. Thanks, Minister Foley. Any moves to provide pharmacotherapy services through public clinics to mitigate risk of pharmacy or GP closures due to quarantine, given that these are amongst our most vulnerable patients, often requiring daily supervised dosing?
Ooh, that is a very good point. Could I get you, maybe Tim, to email me that, or get it via Sam or someone? It's not something that's popped up on my radar, but I can definitely see how that would be a priority, particularly in regional communities, particularly in Shep. I was up there in February and fully understand what you're talking about. It's not just a Shepparton issue. It will be a much wider issue. So how about I take a rain check on that one, and perhaps via VAADA, I get you a response as soon as I can. But it would be part of a wider pattern of what does service provision look like. Like we're already seeing things that were previously unimaginable in terms of service delivery in so many areas happening. But the other side of that coin is that as that happens, we're actually losing touch with a whole heap of different vulnerable community members. And I'm really worried about where those people are, about how we find them, how we engage with them, and how we sustain them. And the different points of engagement, such as what you touched on there, might well be part of a wider solution. So how does that issue of what's provided by who, where, link into that wider, different engagement pattern, not just in a time of social distancing, but beyond. So part of that wider issues, I think, Tim, but on its own, it's a perfectly legitimate thing. And I'll take a rain check on it and get back via VAADA to you, lickety split. Thanks.
Thanks, Minister. We have one from Regional Victoria. So Regional Victoria has been hit hard regarding the support for our clients. Word on the street is that clients are continuing to meet each other. Police are under the pump to enforce social distancing. Social distancing, and there is real fear that community contamination may increase amongst this cohort. We are struggling to maintain a stock of PPE and swab kits. Is there going to be an increase in these resources into rural areas?
The short answer is yes. The long answer is the Chief Health Officer and the emergency measures, the crisis measures that Health and Human Services have in is prioritising a range of areas based on what the Chief Health Officer has identified as the risk profile. Residential disability services, obviously hospitals, and community provision of services for health and the COVID response, GPs, but in that escalating group, I know that alcohol and other drug services are in there. I know some based on concentrations, and you're right, and regional Victoria is particularly problematic when it comes to this, is on that list. But because of the lower numbers of outbreaks so far in regional communities, based on epidemiological assessments, based on density, based on where the virus has broken out at the moment, the Chief Health Officer has a rollout program also associated with testing, and that's informing the now significantly ramping up national provision of PPE, which is probably not the answer you're looking for regional Victoria, but reflects that risk management delivery. I do wake up in a cold sweat at night sometimes and wonder what happens when our vulnerable communities start getting an outbreak in their cohorts and their communities, like we've seen in Northern Europe and in parts of the US. And I fear for what some of the demonisation and victim blaming that will go with that. And that drives me to make sure that in those kind of communities and those kind of service provisions that we argue for PPE, testing, support measures to be provided as soon as we possibly can. I don't have to tell you the obvious, but this is raising all sorts of questions about just how exposed we are in global supply chains. Wuhan has been the world centre of surgical face masks up until this point in time. Perhaps not so much now, but other reconfigurations, other sources, other retooling processes in Australia have seen us, as a result of being able to flatten curves and slow the spread of the virus, have seen us being able to buy ourselves some time and start to address those outcomes without the horror of what we've seen roll out in some other countries. So the short answer is it's a work in progress, but increasingly, as we bought ourselves some time and as we flattened that curve, we're able to start to fill those gaps. And I will take this as a reminder that our regional providers of alcohol and other drug services are a priority. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you, Minister. We have two questions, and we might make these the last two. So they're kind of, I think the terminology the Prime Minister's using is related to the road out. So as we enter the recovery phase of COVID-19, the community will need to change. What flexibility to move funding around and what checks and balances will be in place to ensure the Victorian Government initiatives are well spent? And this is from Stefan from Odyssey.
Thanks, Stefan. I think it's too early to say that we're on the road to recovery. That effective reproduction of the virus measure, which the Chief Health Officer points to, which we are bringing down, when it's below 1, things are on the up and up, and when it's above 1, it's exponentially growing. New York is not that different to where we were a couple of weeks ago. It was a measure of about 1, which is 100%, I grant you. But it is a bit early to be talking about recovery. We've still got some significant way to go. If we keep up the efforts and the significant achievements we've made as a nation, as a community, then on the 11th of May, when the current public health state of emergency expires, we might expect, upon the Chief Officer's advice, an easing of that. It won't be a removal of it. It will, if it happens, it will be an easing of it. So there's that precursor to what I'm going to say. But in terms of flexibility in funding, flexibility in a lot of cases, maintaining the organisation's capacity to deliver, which is based on funding, pretty much we're up for everything at the moment. Yes, there has to be accountability. Yes, there has to be approaches. But this is an unprecedented opportunity to reconfigure not just what you do, but what we do as government to help and assist that. Like the public service is being reorganised around 8 core missions that are designed to cut across traditional silos of government operation. Looks fantastic on paper, but turning it into real world practice outcomes is a little bit challenging. For instance, as part of the mental health relief package that we're trying to deliver for support for asylum seekers and refugees, a federal government responsibility, but one that they were ignoring, we released a package on Easter Sunday that had a whole range of COVID-19 responses to it. And we promised it was going to be streamlined and quickly delivered. But change sometimes is a little bit difficult to push. And we required in our new streamlined processes 3 different contracts from DHHS to the providers, all of whom had existing contracts, all of whom had existing provisions. We fixed it, but it's that kind of frustration at an operational level that needs to equally be examined by what we do. So Stefan and VAADA, I would urge us all to use all of our opportunities to drive that, yes, accountability, but a simplified breaking down of silos, encouragement of how services need to be delivered in a more timely, effective manner. So I think all sorts of things could be up for change. Thanks.
Thank you, Minister Foley. There is one more question I'm going to get you to answer quickly if you can. I think we've taken up, you've been very generous with your time, so thank you for that. This is really about looking at, or the anecdotal evidence, and what we're hearing is that you know, we're likely to see an increase in substance abuse across the pandemic, similarly with, you know, kind of an increase in family violence. And Chantel is asking, could you speak to any resources or funding updates for the sector as we may face an increase in demand for treatment and support?
Yes, I think you're spot on. As we say, we know history tells us that when crisis and trauma happens, one of the responses is an increase in expressions of despair, and whether it's family violence, whether it's self-harm, suicide, alcohol and drug abuse, any number of measures of abuse of illicit or illicit substances. We know that this happens in increasing numbers. We also know that the packages, and they will continue to happen in response to demand, needs to make sure that we resource those delivery of services to the level of demand that we're going to see, because we're not at the moment, and if we're going to predict increasing demand, then we've got to collectively advocate for that. But in doing that, as both Sam, Kent and others have touched on, is the delivery of innovation, because it'll be asked for us, the delivery of change that will be asked for us. And I think the sector has an unprecedented opportunity to shape and demand from government the kind of changes that you need, based on the kind of changes that you're prepared to make and lead in that conversation. And that will also assist me in some of the internal hand-to-hand combat that I have to go through for resources, but it will also help me in conversations which start tomorrow with other states and jurisdictions and the Commonwealth about how we get through this crisis in a mental health and alcohol and other drugs response way. The kind of rule book of ideological preconceptions, particularly from our friends at the Commonwealth, has been somewhat shredded. There's a chance to cement that in a different delivery mode. We want to do that. I know other states want to do that. I know the sector wants to do it. There's an unprecedented opportunity, if we grab it and make it work, to make some of those kind of changes that you touched on, particularly when it comes to resources. To be on a finishing note, if we don't offer value and offer services in a different kind of way, and use the crisis and the coming out of the crisis as the response to that, and accompany it with a demand for appropriate and necessary resourcing, not only are we missing a chance to deliver better outcomes for the people and communities that rely on us, we will be missing one of those once-in-a-generation opportunities to reshape models of care, reshape the integration of support and services, place-based, human-centred, all those kind of long-held-out goals that we can't afford to miss. Because if we do, when we do come out the other end, we want to be in a better position, not a worse position. So thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, everyone. And I look forward to getting Tim's particular suggestion, and I'm sure post today, a very lengthy and important letter from Sam. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you. That was wonderful. We for longer than we thought, but some really great insights into how he's thinking, but also a little bit of call to arms about how we can provide the things that we need to provide to reshape the sector how we have for years wanted it to look. So I'm sure every single one of you guys are up for the challenge. I know I am. So I'd like to move on to Melissa from the Department of Health and Human Services, who can recommence her talk to us. So thank you, Melissa, for your time, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks very much. And it was certainly kind of very generous of the Minister. He gave us much more of his time than we had originally anticipated. And he certainly covered a number of elements I had in my speaking points much more ably than I can. So what I actually might do, I'm a little bit conscious of time, and I'm sure there's a lot of questions out there in the sector. So I'm going to change my 20-minute speech into a very quick 5-minute speech. So I do apologise if I'm kind of racing through things, but I certainly want to make sure we've got time to hear both from Yvonne and give you all an opportunity to ask any questions at the end that you may have. But I think it's important. I'll just kind of firstly just echo the comments I think of everyone just around thanking you all for the hard work and dedication, to make sure we're continuing to deliver treatment and care to some really kind of vulnerable members of the Victorian community. I've been really impressed from what I've been seeing in how you've really quickly pivoted your services, you're working together, you're sharing ideas and kind of introducing those innovations that we need at this point in time. I think it's kind of quite interesting, joining you, here today at that point in the pandemic, where we have been successful in flattening the curve, but perhaps echoing the Minister's comment, yes, we've been successful, but now is not the time for complacency. And we're imagining we've still got a long way to go before a lot of those restrictions are lifted. But nevertheless, I think from the department's perspective, it's given us a little bit more breathing room. We're not having to respond to that worst case scenario. And that does give us time to reflect on what that new future of the AOD sector looks like. It's kind of really heartening to see the Minister also up for that challenge. So for us, it's kind of, again, it's those kind of two things of what are those innovations that we've put in place now that we want to keep, as well as that acknowledgement of, yes, the road to recovery for the AOD sector and for people who use drugs in the community is going to be longer because the fallout of the mental health issues and the fallout of the kind of the long kind of economic recovery Victoria and Australia is going to go to will absolutely impact the sector. So we're going to have to do a lot of kind of good and kind of deep thinking of kind of how we maintain and kind of improve our sector going forward. So I might just maybe just quickly turn on a few bread and butter issues that might be of interest from the community, from the department's perspective. And these are kind of issues that have kind of bubbled up in a few conversations that we've been having over the past few weeks. Sorry, just quickly. So just kind of firstly, in terms of budget, a lot of you will know that the Victorian government has deferred the 2021 budget. So that was obviously scheduled to come out with May. I understand it's been pushed out to October, and that's kind of in line with all other kind of Australian jurisdictions. So what has kind of been agreed is that in terms of organisations' 1920 budget, no funding will be withdrawn this year, and we will also not be managing organisations against your previous targets and activities. So what that kind of does is it does, as you've already been doing, it frees you up to use the funding that you already have flexibly to support those kind of different practices, and can certainly continue to encourage you to do so going forward. So those kind of recurrent funding bases that your organisations have are secure, and it's certainly the expectation that that will roll over into 2021. I am aware, though, there are a number of specific initiatives, and they will have funding that will cease on the 30th of June 2020. We are still awaiting advice from our colleagues in the Department of Treasury and Finance in relation to that budget allocation and timeframes going forward. We are very hopeful we'll get that advice shortly, and we will share that with you when it becomes available. I'll just quickly touch on pharmacotherapy. I'm really kind of pleased to kind of hear that the guidelines that we released again a few weeks ago around the changes to the takeaway doses, enabling third-party collection, and some changes to the training requirements have been really well received. We are certainly up for a conversation with you all about whether we maintain them going forward. Also, maybe just want to highlight the work that our pharmacotherapy area-based networks have been doing. They've been working really hard to engage with a number of the local prescribers and pharmacies to make sure that within local areas, we've got local business continuity plans in place, or identify any areas of high risk that need to be escalated to us here in the department for a central response. I think it's been a really great piece of work that they've let out there. And certainly I think that work has highlighted a few risk areas that we'll be looking into. I think sorry, I apologise, I missed who raised the question, but certainly maybe looking at some sort of kind of centralised pharmacotherapy prescribing option is, we've got a few options on the board that we're kind of reviewing about how we manage some of those risks. And probably another risk I'd highlight is we're a little, we need to do something about how we bring new clients on board. In particular, if we imagine there might be an increase in demand for pharmacotherapy services going forward. For our residential rehabilitation services, again, we've seen some really great work out there from providers who, are still, providing those kind of, those admitted services to clients, alongside the new kind of physical distancing requirements and kind of infection control. But unfortunately, as a result of those kind of those measures we've had to put in place, we have seen a slight drop in capacity in the sector. We did do a recent kind of a short survey of the sector, and we're kind of anticipating about a 32-33% reduction in capacity at the moment, and that has had the consequent impact on kind of wait times. So one of the things that we're kind of thinking about going forward as well is how do we kind of manage people who might be on wait lists longer than ideal? And how do is there any kind of way we can quickly kind of scale up capacity in the residential services going forward? We're also doing a bit more thinking, and we'll have certainly some further conversations with providers going forward on knock wood, it doesn't happen, but should we get an outbreak in facilities, what that might look like, what's the best kind of process to manage those outbreaks. PPE, I actually think the Minister covered that one off relatively well, just kind of acknowledging the global shortage of PPE and, the critical need to conserve those resources. We are kind of feeding into that kind of overarching PPE management process that is being led by the Chief Health Officer. If your organisation has not been engaged in that process to date, certainly kind of please feel free to contact me outside of this kind of forum, just so to make sure that we're kind of feeding in the right information around the supply needs of the AOD sector into that. But in kind of saying that, would really kind of encourage everyone to look at the PPE guidelines that have been put out by the department. They're certainly put out there, in terms of recommending when PPE is required. And predominantly, we do kind of recommend PPE is only used in cases where it's either suspected or known that a person may have COVID-19, or where they've been in contact with someone with COVID-19. But encourage everyone to have a look at that. And one of our kind of key messages it's where possible, it's those kind of measures such as maintaining the 1.5 metres, or maintaining good kind of hygiene, you know, ensuring you're constantly kind of washing your hands. They are kind of some of the core elements in terms of helping the spread of COVID-19. And just kind of, I'll just quickly run through a few other things we're doing. We've been organising kind of weekly forums, you know, and again, thanks to VAADA for helping us kind of coordinate those with the CEOs and managers of the AOD sector, and that's been kind of where it's been really useful for us to kind of have the issues of the sector raised, and you know, we can either respond to those or take those away for further consideration. You know, I acknowledge one of the issues I think that came up last week was around family violence, and acknowledging that I think a lot of our providers are seeing a spike in family violence amongst your cohort. This week we've asked some of our colleagues from Family Violence Victoria to come along. We're keeping on top of supply issues, both in terms of the needle and syringe program, and we are aware of the ongoing issues around the supply of naloxone. And we are, again, kind of working through the various channels, particularly those national channels, to make sure that we are part of the process to resolve those supply issues and make sure our clients are getting the consumables that they need. There's a big piece of work happening around the rollout of digital health and telehealth. Again, hopefully our providers should have been contacted around a survey of digital health capabilities, which will inform a rollout of kind of digital health, you know, across providers in the community-based healthcare sector. And probably the final thing I might just touch on is just around, there's a lot of work happening at the moment around accommodation. And that is in kind of two avenues. The first avenue is the accommodation for international travellers as they kind of return back to Australia, and them going into quarantine for 14 days before they can kind of return home. And secondly, our thinking about what are the accommodation needs of a range of vulnerable cohorts in Victoria, which will include AOD clients and people who use drugs in the community, in a case where they may need to self-isolate, or they may actually come down with COVID-19 and need a place to receive care. So they're kind of two broader kind of pieces of work that are underway with government, and we are kind of working in to support that work to ensure that AOD issues are considered as part of that. So for example, making sure we're screening people as they go into accommodation to make sure we understand what AOD concerns they may have, and to think about what are the supports they may need while in care. So I might just stop there again, and I'll maybe let, I think Yvonne kind of speak next.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. Thanks for the questions that have already been posted. What we're going to do, because I don't want to cut into Yvonne's time, so what we're going to do is I'm going to call on Yvonne to speak next, and then keep posting your questions, but we'll do questions with Melissa and Yvonne together, and I can just pick out the questions that relate to them. So thank you, Yvonne, for joining us. I had the pleasure of being in Albuquerque with Yvonne last year, my Lord. And because of COVID, we're not in Albuquerque currently, or we should be planning to go to Albuquerque. So I'm going to take a rain check on that one, Yvonne, and pass over to you. So thank you, and thanks for your time.
Thank you, Rebecca. So thank you to the Minister who's now left us, but also to Assistant Director Arduca and to VAADA. Such important messages this morning for us all, and I think it's so great that we are all on the same page in terms of moving forwards. And I really want to pay tribute in the next few minutes to you, all of you online, who are, as has already been pointed out, working through this really difficult time and thinking outside the box and thinking about how we can do things differently so that we can still meet the needs of our people. Now, I expect many of you have children and have needed to be helping with the homeschooling, or you might have other loved ones who are needing your help. So it's in those roles as parents or carers that we are realising that we have a very important role in supporting our loved ones. Well, it's the same for our drug and alcohol people, our vulnerable people who need us. And my message to you this morning would be to really emphasise that you are essential to them at this time. So why do I say that? Well, what I'll do is I'll talk about what we've observed, what the response has been, and where to from here moving forward. What do we need to do in order to make the most of this time and really capitalise on the silver linings from this difficult time. So what have we observed? We've seen that the barriers to drug and alcohol treatment have increased, and that's because GPs, primary health care clinics and other prescribers are either self-isolating or they're only doing telehealth, or they're not taking on new clients. So that has started to impact on people being able to get in to see someone. We know that some of the withdrawal units and rehabs have moved to a cohort model, which means that people come in on the same day and stay for 17 or 14 days and then move on to the rehab that they have booked. That reduces flexibility for admissions. It's understandable why those decisions have been taken, but we need to acknowledge that that has reduced flexibility. So for some withdrawal units, such as our one at Dept, that's hospital auspices, we have decided not to go that way in order to try to maintain some flexibility. We have obviously client-facing roles, and so we've seen that there's been an increase or an impact on those client-facing roles in terms of people taking sick leave, having to take on carers leave, or indeed some staff have had to be reallocated to other areas in preparation for COVID-19 and the tsunami that we were expecting that perhaps we won't see in quite such a great peak as initially expected. But with all these changes that have been occurring, there has been some debate about whether drug and alcohol services are in fact essential and which parts of them are essential. And so I really wanted to emphasise today that of course they're essential, and we've heard that from Minister Foley and from Melissa this morning. This is exactly the time not to be there for our clients, not to step back and be absent. We know it's been mentioned this morning about the escalating substance use and the unravelling of mental health, but there'll also be those people who've been flying under the radar that this episode now will flip them into escalating substance use or a mental health episode. And just last week, I can give you an example of a woman who has had difficulties with alcohol in the past, has been travelling okay, but recently was abandoned by her partner. She's drowning in debt, lost her job because of COVID-19, and that tipped her into her first psychotic episode. So they're the kind of things that we are seeing emerging already now that we can expect to see more of moving through this time. The important thing is that because we know these people, because we are seeing them and we're connecting with them, we can recognise much earlier when they're starting to unravel. And that's so important because we'd rather be able to nip those problems in the bud than wait for them to deteriorate further and then end up in the health system bouncing around from one place to another because no one actually understands this person and knows the journey that they've been on to date. So drug and alcohol treatment is essential. Anyone who questions that really needs to be needs to have this conversation with us so that we can point out to them that our work is not just important for the wellbeing and safety of the individual, but it's also for their family and carers and for the community more broadly. So that's what we've observed. What have the responses been? Well, first of all, there's been really good information that was very quickly prepared by different services in the sector. And so that has been able to address the increasing substance use that we're seeing. So the queues of people outside the bottle shops at the beginning of the panic buying period were quite alarming and fly in the face of the new guidelines for reducing the health risks from alcohol, which state that 10 standard drinks a week and no more than 4 on a day what is the level or the threshold at which health risks from alcohol use are reduced. So we need to be able to communicate that to not just to our clientele, but to the broader community, not to go overboard with the alcohol, because we don't want to see the physical health risks that emerge further down the track. We know cannabis use is increasing because people have less to do, or they're using it to manage their anxiety, or they're using it to help them sleep. And so there's information available to help people understand that this is a time now not to increase your cannabis use, but to learn new strategies to manage anxiety and to look at smoking cessation and improving your lung function so that you are in a better state of health, whatever happens with COVID-19. And so with these resources that are available, they're available for both people who drink or use drugs, and they're also available for health workers. So for health workers, for people who use alcohol and drugs, the Pennington Institute, Harm Reduction Victoria have really fantastic resources that if you haven't already looked at them, I would recommend you do. They're very interestingly presented and they use good language that's easy to understand and very practical advice. And then for health workers, the VAADA website lists the services that are open, and as was mentioned earlier, the PABINs and needle and syringe programs that are listed on the government website are also handy resources for us to look at when we're trying to help people navigate through this period. The other response that's happened has been the transition to telehealth, and I'm sure a lot of you are doing that. And some people love this format. But as clinicians, we found it quite tiring. Being online all day actually means we have to use our brains in a different way, and it can get quite tiring, particularly if you're getting older like me. We've also noticed that boundaries can be stretched when you're working online with people. So for instance, we've had a couple of incidents where people have lit up a joint or a cigarette while we're doing a consultation. So we've had to kind of remind people that we're here for a health consultation and what that entails. But importantly, we've also learned that some of our people really do not like this telehealth format. They find it intimidating. They're worried about privacy. Some of them actually don't want us to see their background. And a woman said the other day to one of us here at St Vincent's that she needed to get some books to put on the shelf behind her so that we wouldn't think that she was stupid. I mean, not that we're even looking at the background in that way, but it sort of gives you insight into how our clientele are feeling about this new format. So if anything, we've learned that we need to check in with our people and say, are you happy for this format? Would you rather do it on the phone? Would you rather do it without video? There are different ways to do it, but do check in and make sure that they're okay with the way it's proceeding. Because the last thing we want is to use a format that makes them disengage. In relation to telehealth, of course, there's the usual hackers and trolls and cyber criminals, and we know that cyber crime is going up during this time. So we do need to be mindful of increasing our security when we're using it. And those of you who attend our Echo on a Wednesday morning will know about the unfortunate experience we had recently with hackers coming into our Echo session. So just a reminder to everyone that to keep checking your security levels around using those online formats. I was going to speak a little bit about the opioid agonist treatment or MATOD policy changes, but Melissa's already listed them, so I'll skip that in the interest of time. But I do want to say that as a response, that has been very helpful, particularly as SafeScript became mandatory on the 1st of April. And And so we are seeing the emergence of people who can benefit from Suboxone. In addition to that, in addition to those policies, we're finding that some of our response has been to work in partnership with other organisations or other service providers within the sector, and that's working really well. So, for instance, some people have been contacting us about moving clients onto the new long-acting injectable buprenorphine. And so we've been able to assist with that, and so then the treatment service can continue doing their work with that client while we've been able to provide a fairly rapid response to a different format of buprenorphine. So where to from here? What can we do moving forwards? It's been mentioned, I think we're all waiting for it, that the fallout from COVID-19 will be in terms of substance use problems, mental health problems, physical ill health, family violence, psychosocial instability. We need to keep engaged with our clientele in whatever way we can during COVID-19 and in our interactions with them, so that we can see when those things are starting to make themselves more obvious. And we do need to remind our vulnerable people that physical health is really important at this time. We can't neglect it during this time. Flu vaccination, thinking about stopping smoking and getting help with that, managing chronic disease, be that chronic pain or diabetes or hepatitis C treatment. So let's not forget that those things need to continue, because we don't want to have this period of neglecting physical health and then falling in a heap post-COVID-19. So in order for us to be able to do that, to be able to provide that advice to our vulnerable people, we need to look after ourselves as health workers. And so I do want to take this opportunity to please encourage you to look after yourselves and take opportunities to talk through how you're managing work and home, how you're are you able to debrief? Do you have opportunities to debrief about specific experiences or problems that might emerge during this period? Sometimes it takes a few people to get together and think about, well, what are some different ways we can manage this person's presentation or another person's current problem. Of course, adequate rest and time out and exercise and healthy eating, all the things we should normally be doing, but particularly need to be done around this time so that we don't fall in a heap when we need to be around for our people. So in summary, barriers to treatment are increasing, and we need to do our level best to keep those barriers to a minimum. So thinking outside the box, maybe picking up the phone to our colleagues or other services with whom we collaborate and trying to brainstorm how else can we do this. And the fallout from COVID-19 will increase, and we need to absolutely be ready for that. We've heard from Minister Foley and from Melissa this morning that they're open to thinking outside the box and looking at innovative ways to move forwards. So let's use this opportunity. Let's not miss it, because it's just the perfect time to do it. So while our children and our loved ones need our care and we're essential to them, we are also essential to our vulnerable people. And I want to really emphasise to everybody that I've never been more proud of the sector, and I hope that you are all feeling proud and inspired to keep working, keep turning up every day and seeing the people that need our help. If you take any questions, Rebecca.
Thanks, Yvonne. So we have some questions. The first three look like they're from for Melissa. Sorry, not from Melissa. So Melissa, are you looking at dropping, this is Rob L, are you looking at dropping the costs for dispensing Suboxone methadone with the current climate and financial stress on people?
So, so kind of those dispensing fees are an issue for the Commonwealth Government, but we are certainly in conversations with them about how do we support clients during, during this kind of, the situation. Yes, so it is under consideration.
Thank you. Thanks, Melissa. What does centralised pharmacotherapy prescribing possibly entail, just broadly speaking? Thanks, Patrick Lorains.
Excellent question, and I kind of regretted flagging that the second it came out of my mouth, because it was just some initial thinking we've been undertaking over the past few days, but effectively kind of recognising that as part of the contingency planning, for pharmacotherapy, we may need to kind of transition either existing or new clients to alternative services. We're looking at an option of, do we have a central service either through face-to-face or through telehealth that can perhaps manage some of those clients who may not be able to go to their local provider. And I think that's probably about as detailed as we can get at this stage.
Hang on, I'll unmute myself. The last one for you, Melissa, is could you clarify which specific initiative fundings that will cease on the 30th of June?
There's normally a range of kind of funding lines the department puts out, both for the AOD sector and to all of its kind of providers, that is not recurrent. And so I can't... Probably the one that I suspect will be of kind of concern is the funding for the ICE partnerships, which was, so that funding was kind of scheduled to end on the 30th of June 2020. We would, in a normal budget cycle, we would go through the process to seek additional funding from government to extend that program. That process has now ceased. We won't get budget outcomes until October, and so what we are waiting on is advice from DTF about what is the gap between July and October for when we get some clear advice from government around how some of these lapsing programs might be extended going forward.
Thank you. So to you, Yvonne. Thanks, Yvonne. This is from Patrick. What do you think our best chances of maintaining access to telehealth and other medical innovations related to MATOD?
Yep. I think we should maintain access to it. I think it's worked really well for some people. And I envisage that we'll continue using this format post-COVID. But as I said before, some people don't like it, and we need to really be mindful of them. Because everything flipped over almost overnight into telehealth, and we all thought it was a great idea, it took some time before it started to be filtered back to us that actually this isn't suitable for some people. But I envisage that a lot of telehealth will remain moving forwards because it's efficient and it works, and some people love it. So I'm hopeful that it continues. The other aspect, of course, is tele support or tele mentoring, and that's service providers getting online to work through particular cases that they're finding challenging to manage. So we've been doing a little bit of that with good, I think, good results. I think people are, it's so much easier to get a lot of people, a group of people with different disciplinary backgrounds online together to work through a particular challenging way of proceeding if given the current restrictions. And I think that will continue as well moving forwards.
I might just add to that point of in terms of telehealth and that kind of acknowledgement around there are people that love it and people that not so happy with it, but certainly I think some of the feedback around how it's our kind of expanding access for people living in kind of regional areas and kind of acknowledging the question from the Minister earlier. Capacity or workforce issues out in regional areas is a long-standing issue, both for AOD and all kind of health and human services, and we've kind of had some very kind of positive feedback around how telehealth has really supported some of our regional clients to get access to services they may not normally get access to.
Thank you. For you, Yvonne, does St Vincent have a policy, procedure or guide for service around the long-lasting injection?
We use the DHHS one. So the Department of Health and Human Services has a policy that you can access via the government website, and yeah, we use that one. If other support is needed around perhaps particular detail, the DHHS line is available. People can call that, or you can call us at St Vincent's, and we're happy to advise.
Thank you. That's the last of our questions, so I'll let people ponder the questions that they might want to ask you. And now I'm trying to busily think. A good chair will always have a question up her sleeve, and now I'm stuck here. So I guess I'd like to touch on regional and rural Victoria, and about how I was really heartened, Yvonne, by having kind of those supervision models that are quite different and unique. And we've kind of, I love the multidisciplinary, and you know, I kind of drank the Kool-Aid, and very much a firm believer of an echo platform where it's, you know, all teach, all learn. How we could scale that up, I guess, across the sector. We've got a time to, you know, kind of use our resources, and whilst we're caring for clients, it's continually been on my mind as a CEO about the anxiety that staff are facing on a daily basis because they are carers. Because I know myself, trying to be a teacher, a mum and a CEO and a carer of a father-in-law, sees my cup quite empty on any given day. So how could we, as a sector, take that and actually kind of run with it and scale it up?
Is that a question to me or to Melissa?
Sorry, to you, Yvonne. And then Melissa might fund it.
Sounds good. Look, the models, so you're referring to the ECHO model, which for those of you who aren't aware of ECHO is the Extending Community Healthcare Outcomes, which is a framework that started in Albuquerque in the United States and is now being translated across the world. And it's a certain framework by which to support people, professionals in managing some of the more complicated clients that they're seeing. ECHO, it doesn't have to always be ECHO. There are other ways of tele-mentoring that can be done, or tele-support. And generally it needs some funding for the time that it takes for people to get together and be able to prepare the cases and talk through them. But in terms of cost effectiveness, we haven't been able to demonstrate it here in Australia because we haven't had the resources to do that, but certainly international models have looked at this format of complex care management and shown that it's very cost effective. It reduces the need for people in rural regions to need to travel into town to see a specialist, because they can have most of their care done locally. And certainly in our opioid management ECHO, we've seen that when within our community of practice, people present cases that they're struggling with in their regions, and we've been able to, as a group, brainstorm what sort of things the person can do locally to help them manage that person. So the model has been scaled across the world. There's no reason why it couldn't be scaled across the state. It just needs some funding to be able to fund the time that it takes for coordination of such sessions.
No, I think Yvonne kind of covered most of the points there, but certainly, you know, again, just kind of signalling that these kind of workforce development issues are part of our consideration of that, you know, recovery planning, and what does the AOD sector look like, you know, on the other side of COVID-19. But I think, though, you know, there's kind of an important point there around and I think I saw it in one of the questions earlier as well, around how are we building the evidence base for what is actually working and what isn't, and what you know, what are the things we actually do want to scale up. I don't know about you, but I certainly over the past few weeks haven't thought about evaluation methodologies or frameworks or anything like that. So, you know, I think a lot of what we've put in place has been a bit on the fly, and we need to, you know, think about again, what does evidence look like in a COVID world? And, you know, maybe whether we may need to start kind of rapidly building in some of these evaluation elements kind of going forward, so that we can actually, you know, make that case, you know, again, reflecting the comments of Minister Foley of, you know, the internal fighting we'll need to do with our good friends in Treasury, to show them that, you know, what we're doing, it's great, it's working, we're getting good outcomes for our clients, and it's something we need to kind of continue funding going forward.
The evaluation or the feedback is by and large positive. It's the evaluation of whether we can show definitive changes in outcomes for our clients, which is a much harder thing to show and needs time and needs a lot of expertise. But really, the beauty with those models is that we always talk about breaking down silos. This is breaking down silos because it's getting everyone in the room to talk together and use their skill set to input into how can we move forward with this person who's presenting with a complex problem that needs to be managed. So it's true breaking down of silos, and that's the beauty of being able to use telehealth or video conferencing to get people together and really think together about what will work or what can work in that particular area of the state, what resources are available.
Thank you. Is there anyone else there that has a question? Because if not, we might wrap it up. So no one's put on that last second question and speak now, forever hold your peace. No. So I want to thank everyone for their time today. Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, Melissa, and extend our thanks to Minister Foley for his very generous use of his time. I think I might be biased because I'm sitting here looking at myself, but I think this has been a really great innovation. We're a little bit bumpy at some stages, and I'll apologise. I think we'll get better at this, but it's actually gone really smoothly. So I think it's great. A great platform, and again, I know from a regional service providers, you know, 8 of my staff didn't get in the car at 7 o'clock this morning to go down to service providers conference. I still think there is room where we need to get together and actually see each other and have those kind of corridor conversations. But this is a really effective use of people's time, especially from a regional service provider's point of view. So thank you. Thanks, VAADA. Absolutely great job as usual. And I would really like to thank you all and continue to do sorry, I'm getting distracted by all the chat that's going on. I want to thank you and keep doing what you're doing. Keep documenting. You never know what evidence we'll need, but, you know, kind of when we have a little bit of time and space to breathe is about how we do capture the things and then capture some client feedback. I know one of the things that we've been able to do at Primary Care Connect is open from 7 a.m. or offer services from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and the feedback has been amazing from clients about who knew that people all wanted to get called before work so they didn't have to take time off work. So trying to capture the evidence about how we keep that post-COVID. So post-COVID might be a long way away, but we've got some time to think through the things that we did put in on the fly and about how we to keep them moving forward. So thank you. I'm getting some lovely feedback from the chat that it was welcome, that we did a great job. So for that, I will say goodbye and I'll see you all again at the next one. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.